Hello and welcome, dear Hydrofoil fans, and congratulations to the International Hydrofoil Society. You all know these documentaries, some random guy stands in some random place and tells random stuff. My name is Thomas Wuhrmann and I'm your host for this presentation today. Many of you actually don't know me, so I am the kind of random guy, but after all, I've been a proud member of the International Hydrofoil Society for many years. I can prove that. But this is not about me, it's about the place I'm standing in. And this is definitely not a random place. I'm standing here in the middle of the noisy city of Lucerne, one of the most important tourist destinations in Switzerland. Lucerne is known for the lake with a large fleet of historic paddle steamers. And there's the wooden bridge, the old town with the city wall and the towers, and, of course, the Lion Monument. There's history everywhere you look. But the story I want to tell you today is almost completely unknown. I'm not a shipbuilding engineer or educated historian. I'm a documentary filmmaker, among other things. And that means I'm a storyteller. Today, I want to tell you something about Supramar. Who or what is Supramar? Here's a very brief overview. In the 1920s, a young engineer named Hanns von Schertel began building hydrofoil boats in Wiesbaden, Germany. He built various prototypes. Not all of them worked. In the 1930s, von Schertel met the well-known shipbuilder Gotthard Sachsenberg, and together they began to build larger hydrofoil boats. The first was this one, the so-called Kobel, the Konsortialboot. The German Navy quickly became interested in the technology, and soon the first types were built for a possible use in World War II. The most famous boat was the VS-8. It was designed to transport tanks for the German army from Italy to Africa. It was never really used. After the war, von Schertel and some of his engineers, as Karl Büller and Eugen Schatté, went to Switzerland and founded Supramar here in 1952. Here in Switzerland, in Stanstadt to be precise, the first commercial hydrofoil was built. This resulted in other types of ships, such as the PT-20 and the PT-50. The hydrofoil boats were exported all over the world, and Supramar became the market leader for hydrofoils for the next 25 years, at least outside of the Soviet Union. And now, here we are, in the middle of the history. Okay, there's no water scene here around. This is a tourist coach parking lot for visitors of the famous Lion Monument. This is just around the corner from here. But if you look on my left side, there's the Urania House, address Friedenstraße number 2. You will see the Indian restaurant there. Supramar had its first office just above it. Below them was a tea room back then, and with a little luck you would have met Mr. von Schertel and his engineers there in the afternoon, having a cup of coffee and a piece of cake, every day. Or you would have seen the staff at the newsstand back there buying their cigarettes. And if you look on the other side now, there is this big white building in the background. Supramar moved there at the end of the 1950s. We see another restaurant, the Caravel, named after the famous jet airplane. Directly above, the Supramar had 3 wall floors for its offices and development departments. We are now right in front of this memorable house, Denkmalstraße number 2. That means Monument Street. Lion Monument, of course, it's right over there. I have a key for this house. It's a real key. But we don't have any permission to shoot inside. That wouldn't be so interesting either. There are only dentists and lawyers today. But thanks to the magic of filmmaking, we can go back in time and have a look. This is what it looked like here in the 1970s. Unfortunately, the pictures are of a poor quality. I only have an old video copy of the original film. The film itself is missing. But we can see a little bit of the atmosphere. For example, here's the technical director, Volker Joost. And this is Eugen Schatté. And here comes the boss himself, Baron von Schertel. Soon after these shots were taken, Supramar moved into another building. We can take a look at a few photos from the inside here. The new company headquarters was no longer in Lucerne, but in Stannstadt, in the canton of Nidwalden. Stannstadt. The village is known for? Right, it's the home village of my childhood. Now I'm here in Stannstadt at that point where maybe one of the most important moments in hydrofoil history took place. Today there are no hydrofoils anymore, just water and a few happy little clouds. But if you have a look on old photographs, you may recognize the landscape. Maybe over there, or over there, with Mount Pilatus on the maybe most iconic Supramar photograph ever. This point is exactly where the Wasser shipyard stood until 1972. The shipyard was founded in the late 19th century and built sailing boats, motorboats, icebreakers, barges and many more. Of course, we are more interested in hydrofoils. The official history says that right on this place the first Supramar boat was built in the early 50s. This is not correct, at least in parts. Even before the World War II, von Schertel came to this shipyard and the construction of the first hydrofoil began. During the war, the parts were hidden in the attic. I have talked with an eyewitness for this story. During the war, von Schertel stopped by sometimes and promised that the work would continue after the war. Von Schertel's mother was living in Switzerland at that time, on the Bürgenstock just around the corner, and so he got a visa from the Swiss government. At the end of the 1940s, he was able to enter Switzerland normally again, and financiers were found in Switzerland. So the boat could be completed, and finally was tested here, on the first time in the spring of 1952. Later that year, in September, it was presented to the media and they covered it worldwide. It was a sensation. The first step was done. All that was missing was the commercial use of the boat. But first, let's have a look on some other impressions of these early days. Benvenuti nel bellissimo Lago Maggiore. Welcome to the beautiful Lake Maggiore here in Ticino, the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. We are here in Ascona, which is one of the famous tourist hotspots. Usually, if there is no COVID-19, you can take a hydrofoil from here to Italy. As you can see, this is not possible today, but we can take a trip from the archive. The hydrofoils are operated by a state-owned shipping company that operates all passenger ships on the three large northern Italian lakes, including paddle steamers and car ferries. There are currently 2 hydrofoils on the Lake Maggiore. So far there would have been 3 hydrofoils here, but the third, Lord Byron, was relocated to Lake Como in 2019. And now we just want to enjoy the ride for a moment. Well, you may have noticed these aren't Supramar hydrofoils anymore. But once again, thanks to the magic of filmmaking, we can go back in time to this place in 1953. Here, the first commercial hydrofoil was put into service in May 1953. The hydrofoil's name was Freccia D'Oro, Golden Arrow. The boat of the type PT-10 had a capacity for 32 passengers and quickly became an exotic attraction. It was only in service for 2 years, but it changed the world of hydrofoils forever. Let's enjoy some more impressions. Among the passengers of the Freccia D'Oro was a certain Karl Rodriguez from Messina. You may have heard of him. He was enthusiastic about the new type of boat and he wanted to build such hydrofoils himself. Karl Rodriguez had a shipyard in Messina. Well, he actually had a railroad repair shop, but that doesn't matter. Supramar and Rodriguez made a license agreement. The result was the PT-20 in 1956, a new, larger type of ship for 70 passengers that was first used between Reggio Calabria and Messina. That was the Freccia del Sole, the Sun Arrow. During the same period, the Supramar had a smaller boat built in Holland, the PT-3. This type was made for the German water police, so that they could control the cargo ships on the Rhine River. There was also the idea of building the boat for sport fishing, but I don't know if one of them ever was sold for that. In the meantime, the PT-20 was selling very well, but a boat with a larger seating capacity was actually needed, and that was the birth of the PT-50 in 1959. This hydrofoil with 2 engines and the capacity up to 125 was at the time the maximum that could be built, and sold even better than the PT-20. The boats were sold all over the world. Some of them do not always have easy conditions in their service, as we can see here. When we talk about selling, Supramar's boats were always built under license. Supramar did not have its own shipyard. So it was of course important to find other licensees beside Rodriguez. And then the Japanese became aware of Supramar. Hitachi Zosen wanted to build hydrofoils. After some back and forth, they actually didn't want to pay license fees. An agreement was reached and Hitachi became an important partner for the Supramar. This shipyard built Supramar boats until the 80s. Here is one of the last ever built. Another important licensee was Westermoen in Norway. The PT-20B and the PT-50 were built here. In the meantime, Supramar had a new project, the PT-150, a combination of passenger and car ferry. Westermoen got the license to build the 3 PT-150, the first one in 1968. The ship had the classic self-stabilized surface-piercing bow foil. The stern foil was full submerged and stabilized. When you see the ship at full speed, I think it's still impressive. And the PT-150 is still one of the largest commercial hydrofoils ever built. Unfortunately, the story didn't end well. The ship wasn't fast enough for the planned mission, and so it was only used briefly on the planned route. Then, the PT-150 were in use in the Bahamas, near the Niagara Falls, and on many other routes. Finally, in the 80s, the ships, rebuilt and without foils, ended up as tourist boats in Florida. There would be a lot more we could talk about. For example, the so-called KTS-160, a patrol boat for the German Navy. The hull was made entirely of plywood, without screws or nails. Or this PT-4, the only one of its kind. Or the MT-250, which never got beyond the concept stage. Or the supply boats for oil platforms. Or the Bremen Pioneer, which at the first glance looks like a PT-20, but it isn't. But let's move on to the next part now. In the meantime, a lot had changed at Supramar. Americans invested and General Dynamics took over a large part of the shares. A project from that time is this boat, the Suprafoil. These foils could be folded up on the beach, and the kit could be mounted on any regular motorboat. Investors expected a lot from that, but it was probably too complicated for the customer. Soon after, a young businessman, Hussein Najadi, appeared. He took over the American shares and wanted to bring Supramar back to success. The new hope was the PT-75. This was in the early 70s. And, together with Henry Fock, owner of the Far East Hydrofoils, and Stanley Ho, owner of the casinos in Macau, a Supramar shipyard was to be built in Hong Kong. They signed the contract, and shortly afterwards, the PT-75 was built at Supramar Pacific Shipbuilding. To be honest, this PT-75 was the second of this type. The first was built in England. Here are some rare shots from a trial run. It's the same old videotape, so the quality isn't better. Then, something completely unexpected happened. Rodriguez launched his own hydrofoil boats, the RHS series, and Rodriguez refused to pay royalties to the Supramar. A long legal battle began that Supramar was unable to win. After a legal dispute with Rodriguez, the Supramar went down, Najadi left the company, and, after a liquidation and re-establishment, Harry Trevisani took over the new Supramar. Trevisani was interested in sailing with foils and wanted to develop in that direction. Trevisani wanted to set the speed record in sailing, which is why there was this project, illustrated by the German industrial designer Luigi Golani. But the old gentlemen of the Supramar did not believe in sailing with foils. Well, what would they say today? But so they looked for other projects. There was the Seabus High Air, a wing and ground effect vehicle funded by the European Union. Unfortunately, the project was stopped. Supramar then worked on its own concepts for wing and ground and surface effect ships, as this drawing and a very early computer animation show. But 50 years after Supramar introduced the commercial hydrofoil, the story was over. Supramar no longer exists and the days of hydrofoil boats on Lake Lucerne are over. Well, almost. If you are lucky, you might see this one, developed in Lucerne. Or this one from a Swiss racing team. And maybe even this one that visited us a few weeks ago. But there's a place nearby the lake where you can still find a few traces of Supramar. It's the Swiss Museum of Transport. In addition to locomotives, cars and planes, you will also find ships here, of course. For example, this submarine, the first passenger submarine in the world. Or the very first steamship of Lake Lucerne, built in 1848, under restoration at the moment. By the way, these photos of a meeting between Supramar and a delegation from Hitachi Zosen were also taken here. Here is the official souvenir photo. The museum is a worthwhile destination for every technology fan, but we want to focus on hydrofoils again. Well, this corner isn't huge, but it has some really interesting pieces here. A bit of memorabilia from all over the world. A bit of memorabilia on the Supramar. And these three models. We have already seen the PT150 in motion. This model is a shipyard model and originally came from the Supramar, like this PT20, which has been here since my childhood. But we are now looking at this small boat, the ST1. Originally, this boat was built as a sports boat. Later, Supramar used this boat as an experimental craft to test the Supramar air stabilization system. With this system, air is released through small holes in the foil in a controlled manner, in order to stabilize the full submerged foil. Moving parts on the foil are not necessary anymore. And now we can have a look on this one. This is the real stuff. This is the last surviving foil of a Supramar experimental craft. And I'm proud to say it belongs to my own collection. If you have a closer look, you can see the small holes in the foil. This is for the Supramar air stabilization system. We have just talked about that. And next to it, you see the 1000 horsepower gas turbine. I think now we want to see this in action. The so-called ST3A, based on a PT3, was a test boat to test the full submerged foil system for the US Navy. Tests were made here on the lake, and later the boat was also tested at sea. These are pictures taken on the French coast. Here on the lake they also tested how the boat reacts to simulated missile launches. You can see that the boat stays calm, not the cameraman. But the US Navy decided differently, and instead of Supramar, Boeing built the famous Navy Hydrofoils. So that is the story of the Supramar and what's left of it. But luckily more has survived than just this. You may know that my team and I made a documentary. We were able to speak to important witnesses of this time, and these interviews carry on their stories in order to tell them again and again and again to future generations. Among them was Hans-Jörg Waser, the last known eyewitness to the construction and trials of the very first Supramar boat. Or Volker Joost, the long-time technical director. There was also Pascal Najadi, son of the murdered Supramar CEO Hussein Najadi. In addition, Vera Büller, daughter of the head of construction Karl Büller, and of course Harry Trevisani, the last owner of the Supramar. I'm happy that he gave me the entire Supramar archive for my own collection. Much was already destroyed in the 80s, but the collection of files and plans and 1,500 photos still represent a unique historical value today. and there are plans that this collection can also be made available to the public in the future. This is our brief excursion into the history of the Supramar. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you want to contact me, here's my email address. You can also find a lot of pictures and information on the film's website. It's all in German, but you will surely find your way through. Thanks for watching, and bye bye from Switzerland.